Hey guys, thanks again for tuning in to Extra Life and for supporting us and for your donations. We really appreciate it. Right now we have Kelly Diggs here joining us, a senior creative designer, and we're really excited to have him here to answer some of your questions and chat a little bit about creative and also just kind of how you ended up here at Wizards and all that good stuff. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Absolutely, and thank you all for your donations.
Yeah, thanks guys. So the first question that we've been asking everybody is, what card in all of Magic would you be?
I'm going to have to go with Kiora, Master of the Depths. Kiora's second Planeswalker card. She does everything I want to do in a game of Magic. There are giant monsters fighting things, and she's... obviously, member of the story team don't really play favorites, but if I had a favorite Planeswalker, she would be my favorite Planeswalker, so...
If you had one.
If I had.
That's right.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, so very Simic. Very cool. One of our donors wanted to ask, Urza was an iconic Planeswalker for the early days of Magic's story. Was he born with a Planeswalker spark?
I don't know if you know. That's a good question. That goes into some deep lore. The snap answer that most people, I think, would give you is yes, obviously, Urza Planeswalker, where, what else would have happened to him. Honestly, and this is not a canonical answer because I don't know. I wasn't here when the decision was made.
Sure.
But as honestly, as far as I can tell, I don't think he was.
Oh.
I don't think he was. It's some very obscure stuff in the novel The Thran, and then some in the Brothers' War and in the novel Planeswalker, involving a guy named Glacian way back during the Thran Empire, 5,000 years before Urza was born. He had a Planeswalker spark. His soul ended up in a rock. Urza and Mishra fought over the rock. The rock ended up in Urza's eyes. It is his eyes. It's said multiple times that his eyes are sort of the center of his consciousness and what allows him to planeswalk. So my conclusion based on the text, again, just as a person who has read it, not making this call for canon, but my interpretation as a person who has read it, is that Glacian is confirmed to have had a planeswalker spark. Glacian's soul is confirmed to be in Urza. Urza says multiple times he can planeswalk because of his eyes, which are the stone that had the soul that was Glacian's. I believe that Urza's planeswalker spark is actually Glacian's planeswalker spark.
Whoa. That was a way deeper answer than I was expecting.
Yeah.
That's intense.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a good question. That is
an excellent question. Yeah, I was like, yes.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So that's really cool.
Again, not a definitive answer,
Right.
just my reading.
Just another fan doing some detective work.
Yeah.
Very cool. The next question we had was, how did you get introduced to Magic, and what is about it is so appealing to you?
So I was 11 years old. I went over for the afternoon to play at my friend Brett's house. Another one of our friends, Mark, was there, and they pulled out these cards that I'd never seen before. So this would have been, when was I, 11? 1994, and probably summer of 94, and they had some early core set cards. I remember Kurt Ape and Living Wall and Wall of Wood, and we had no idea how to play. We played all lands down, open hands, so we just looked at each other's hands. We played all our lands. We didn't know what half the keywords did. We thought damage stayed on creatures permanently. We were marking it with beads, whatever. None of that matters. None of that matters at all. It was just that, obviously I was a fantasy fan, and all of these kind of fantasy things, these war mammoths and ogres and everything were here on these cards, not to fight like you do in D&D or in those kind of very, very early video games that we had then or whatever, but to play, to command, to put into play and have them do things. So I went home and I begged my mom for money, and I went to the store, and I remember I got it would have been 90 cards, so 60 card starter deck and 2 booster packs, and somewhere in those 90 cards there was a Shivan Dragon. I have that Shivan Dragon on the wall of my cube still to kind of remind me what it was that hooked me, and that was the moment actually when I opened that Shivan Dragon. It's just like I can't actually articulate it. I'm a words guy and I can't articulate it, but something about that combination of the art, the name, the flavor text about how cruel they are, and this thing, clearly this fire-breathing dragon here on this little card for me to put in my deck and play, just grabbed me and hooked me, and I have been on it ever since. There's never been a chance of me walking away from the game after that.
That's awesome. Very, very cool. Another donor wanted to know, how has the introduction of Planeswalkers as cards changed how the Magic team tells the story of each world?
That's a good question. So it's worth noting that Planeswalkers were introduced as cards 9 years ago now.
Oh, wow, yeah.
People think of them as new or whatever. It was like 9 years ago out of Magic's 23 year history. So a not insignificant chunk of the time. I was not on the story team when they were introduced. I was in the building, but I can certainly tell you what I know of how stories were told and what I know of how they're told now. Planeswalkers are perfect as the through line. And it's very weird that our from the beginning, from the alpha rulebook, we've told you are a planeswalker. This game is about planeswalking, but planeswalkers not really on cards, and planeswalking not shown, and even going from plane to plane was not a thing for a long time. We spent almost the entirety of early Magic on a single plane, Dominaria.
Right, yeah.
So to actually have that be an element in the game was hugely important. So the first development was we go from world to world. Really starting with Mirrodin in 2003. We go from Mirrodin to Kamigawa to Ravnica, like world to world to world to world, to show off all these different settings in this multiverse that we have. That's one of our huge strengths, is that we get to show you a new world or go back to one that you love every 6 months. But the result of that, and I remember experiencing this as a player, is that there was nobody to really get attached to, particularly after after the Weatherlight saga ended, and the big Urza story wrapped up. Urza was dead. All of that. There was nobody who was really going world to world, and the old Planeswalkers were so powerful that every time they did show up in the story, it was as a Deus Ex Machina or whatever. And it was pretty unsatisfying. So to introduce Planeswalkers as cards and to move them in the story to be mortal mages who are capable of walking the planes and make that the special thing about them, those both let us kind of, to use a cliche, have our cake and eat it too, as far as going to new settings, but having a consistent stable of characters that we get to draw from. So it's really let us become character focused as well as setting focused in a way that we didn't get to be before. And now to us, our characters are at the core of our story. These characters that we get to follow around. We still put a ton of work into the plane-bound characters, the legendary creatures, and everything. We play Commander. All of us on the story team play Commander. We love those creatures. We love those characters just as much as people on the outside do, and we want them to be awesome. But as far as month to month, year to year, set to set, it's having that cast of Planeswalker characters who can move from setting to setting that lets us tell the stories we do.
Yeah, it's very exciting. How has the Uncharted Realms column evolved over the years, speaking of, and what do you think makes it so popular?
So, Uncharted Realms originated as kind of a side project on the part of Jenna Helland, who's now the manager of the art and story teams, the combined creative team. And it was a way of, and it's reflected in the name, a way of sort of taking the stories of little individual cards, sometimes characters that you might see in the card game, and teasing them out into a whole piece of fiction. This is Magic Story, what we now call Magic Story. Right. It used to be called Uncharted Realms. That name, in fact, reflects the shift that I'm about to talk about. So at the time, the idea was that these weren't essential. These weren't the story. The story was still being told in novels or ebooks at the time. these were little side explorations, and I got my start really doing creative writing for Magic on Uncharted Realms, writing a little story. I wrote one about Experiment 1 from Gatecrash, and another about whatever that Dimir card, the blue-black with the lady giving me the dagger, whatever. I don't know card names now that I name cards. It's really weird. Anyway, so it was designed to be these one-off things that you could dip in and out. I got this beautiful email from someone once who talked about how the Uncharted Realms stories were great. They were like lost buttons in the road.
Oh.
Finding one lost button is kind of sad and poignant, and you wonder where this button came from. Finding this whole trail of lost buttons is a little bit puzzling and kind of odd. So around Khans of Tarkir, we decided to stop the ebook line and tell the story in what was then Uncharted Realms. So the story of Khans of Tarkir block is on the website, and that was the first time we'd ever done that. We were very excited about that. So that was taking a tool that we already had, this weekly web story that we already had, and repurposing it to do something that, again, as per the name, Uncharted Realms, it was really never designed to do. And we were delighted to find that interest in it soared. That once we were talking about the planeswalkers, the legendary characters, the situations that you see on cards, not just this or that common having a bad day, got some great stories out of that.
Sure.
But once we were actually telling the story of how Sarkhan changed the timeline in Khans of Tarkir block and how the Khans fell and the Dragon Lords rose, people were hooked. They wanted to read it. And so since then, the numbers that we've been getting as far as people reading and linking it around and talking about it have just gone up and up and up.
Awesome.
And now with Magic Story, we're in a place where it's very episodic. It is week to week. We are telling the story. We're trying to tell the story of our planeswalkers and of the plane. We've struck that balance in different ways. We'll continue to strike it in different ways. But fundamentally, we've moved from the lost button model to this episode model, and that is where the story lives. And having there be that answer, how do I follow the story of this block? Go to this page, read these stories right here. Having that answer, having that so accessible, has been just a game changer for us.
That's really cool. I didn't realize it was so recent that shift happened.
Yep.
Very cool. Another question someone had was, how has your experience as a designer altered your perspective about the game?
So it certainly altered my perspective about design. I wrote an article about this at one point around way back when Worldwake came out. I was on the Worldwake design team. And I had a lot of ideas about what it's like to be on a Magic design team, about, coming up with the world and the mechanics and all of this. It's like I was on a small set in the real world where someone else does the world building, and we already had most of our mechanics. We already knew we were doing landfall. We already knew we were doing multi-kicker. It's like, oh, what's left? Well, all the other stuff, all the stuff that design actually is, which is making individual cards and seeing where they're fun and trying out different expressions of things. I have come to appreciate a lot more that cards can lie to you. That when a card says goblin creatures you control get +1/+1 on it, and you open that card, it is making a certain promise to you about goblins, namely that there are some to get +1/+1. And when you playtest a set early in design, not all of those promises actually bear out. Sometimes the cards promise you things that haven't been brought fully into fruition in the card set, and you have a terrible time. I don't like playtesting very much. People are like, oh, you get to sit around and play Magic. Yeah, you get to sit around and play Magic sets that aren't done. Magic sets full of cards without art that lie to you about whether they'll work. We play the bad games to find the good games so that y'all can play them. That's what we do, really, when we're playtesting. And it can be fun. I certainly have fun playtesting sometimes, but it is not as much fun as it sounds. So that is the main thing, is just appreciating the fact that it just seems so natural that if there's a card in a booster that says, find artifacts, put things in your graveyard, whatever, that it's going to work. but actually there's a huge amount of work from what we call design and what we call development, which really are both fundamentally parts of game design, that goes into actually making sure that card is not lying to you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never heard playtesting described that way, but it's really true. Sometimes you're like, you just play a rare that's just absolutely out of control, and you're like, that wasn't fun, or you're like, this card's gonna be sweet, and you see nothing to support it, and you're like, oh, that wasn't fun either.
Yeah, and
it's that part of that process, that iterative process.
Yeah, and like losing to a card that's just been misbalanced. Like I remember in World Weight Design playing against a very early version of Rumbling Aftershocks, the card that dealt 1 for each time you had kicked a spell. It dealt 2 for each time you kicked a spell, and instead of 5, it cost 3. And somebody just went to town on me with their ever-flowing chalices and whatever, and it was just, it's like, oh, well, that was not fun. That was not a fun game of Magic. So, and that's how we ended up with, and okay, now the card's not great, but it's not ruining days the way that it ruined mine, certainly.
That's amazing. So speaking of game design and your job here, what was your path into Wizards and kind of your career path since you arrived? Because it's kind of a little bit unique, right?
Yeah, and I've talked about this before in an interview with you, which I found out after it went out is like 17 minutes long because I can talk about it for a while. So I'm going to try not to talk about it for that long here. But briefly, I played Magic. I knew Magic. I loved Magic. And for the roles that I have had in the building, that is essential. That's not true of all roles in the building. We have people come in whose knowledge of Magic is moderate or even virtually non-existent. And depending on the job they're doing, that can be fine. But I have been a website editor. I've been a card editor. I've worked on the story. You really need to know the game backwards and forwards to do that stuff. And so the first thing that I did was play Magic pretty much continuously. I mean, not continuously, technically, not 24/7, but continually from the time I was 11 into my adulthood. So that was kind of qualification 1. And anytime I sort of have felt underqualified, it's like, well, okay, but how many people know what, whatever, think of an obscure Magic card. How many people, which again, I don't know card names anymore, but how many people know what whatever obscure Magic card does? Actually, not that many, and that is a thing. Having all that in your brain is a thing. So that was the first thing I sort of did to get here. I developed a technical skill, editing. That is huge. Having a technical skill that can get you inside the building to do something technical is a huge part of getting here, because you need to know Magic. Just knowing Magic, well, okay, there are some number of people who do, so you need something beyond that. So I worked as an editor. I didn't do it in order to work here. I did it because it was something that I was good at. Then I started writing articles for websites. That is a very different process now with Twitter and blogging, and there's so many people, on YouTube, there's so many people making names for themselves as Magic content creators, going through a very, very different pipeline than I did 10 years ago. But nonetheless, I started writing at the time. It was for StarCityGames.com, and they had open submissions at the time, so it was just some guy. I actually wrote humor articles about flavor. And when I first got here in the building, one of the managers of the creative team said, "Oh, you're that guy." Fortunately, I was not interviewing for the creative team at that time.
It's awkward.
But yeah, so I got hired on as a coverage editor on a contract basis, and then hired on as the editor for the website. Since then, I have bounced around the building in various ways. One of the things I like about Wizards is that they make that pretty possible here, where people from any department will get to come and play test at some point and offer their feedback. And if they give really smart, keen feedback, then they're on R&D's radar. And if they express an interest, go to these design seminars that we have and everything. You can really get your foot in the door if design is really the thing you wanted to do. Now, when I came, I thought design was really the thing I wanted to do. It turned out to be not not really where my passion lay. That crafting the story of Magic, I'd always wanted to be a writer. I'd always loved Magic. I had not thought about being a Magic writer, but the more that I worked, I worked as a web editor and then as a card editor. Working as a card editor was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that, and I learned a lot about Magic, about how the workflow and how you go from a design idea to a printed finished Magic card in a pack that I would not have learned otherwise. Very glad I spent that time. But the more that I saw the work that the creative team was doing, the more I thought I need to be a part of this. So I talked with my manager at the time, senior editor Del Loggle, about doing a little 6-month stint in creative, which is something that we do sometimes, and that was very successful. I was very happy there, and together we made the decision for me to stay where I am. And
cool.
That's been.
When was that? Yeah.
When was that? I remember what set was internal at the time, which isn't all that helpful. I worked on Dragons of Tarkir, so that's not when Dragons of Tarkir came out, or I guess I worked on Fate Reforged. What it was, 3 years ago, 2.5 or 3 years ago, something like that. And been trucking away at that ever since, and having an absolute blast, knowing that 11-year-old me would be extremely happy.
Yeah, that's really exciting that you've kind of fulfilled the things that you really love and combined new skills that you acquired later on in life with an early passion to forge this kind of career. That's really neat.
I feel incredibly fortunate to have been able to do it.
Yeah. This is a great question. We don't know who submits the questions, but this question's pretty excellent, and you'll see why I brought that up in a minute. The question is simply, who is your favorite Magic author, and why is it Nick Davidson?
Well, Nick, that's an interesting question. I think what I really appreciate about Nick's writing is an ability to lend unique voices, particularly to characters who are sinister, underhanded, devious yet charming, really people who are at their core very, very unpleasant, but can put a good coating on it. That's really what I like about it. So I don't know what it is about Nick that really gives him the expertise to do that, but there's just some kind of insight that he has into characters like that I just love getting to tap him for an Ob Nixilis or a Leovold, somebody really slimy like that. and I just think he does that better than anybody else.
Wow, that's quite a compliment.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but I am a big fan of Nick's stories as well. Another question we had is, which Magic set are you proudest to have worked on, and what about that set was so special to you?
Okay, we get very excited about the things that we work on. We always feel like we are improving our craft and doing better and better work. So to be honest, the single set I'm proudest of has not come out yet. It's spring 2018, and future. I'll get to tell you at the time why I am so excited about it.
Tune in 2 years.
Yeah, come on back. Maybe for Extra Life in 2 years, you can ask me questions about it. But for now, that's kind of an iffy answer.
Sure.
So as far as things that have actually come out, I would have to say Conspiracy 2.
Cool.
Conspiracy
Cool.
Take the Crown. It was a really interesting thing because with a standard release set, there are so many cooks in the kitchen. There are so many people working together, and that collaboration is fun. It's tremendous. It is part of what we do, where right. Design puts in this theme, and that gets us to think about something in the world, and we come back and say the world is shaped like this, and that lets design do this. There is a lot of back and forth, certainly. The whole story and art teams work together to craft those places. But Conspiracy 2, all the teams involved were just much smaller. The timeline worked a little differently, so that design was working a little bit further ahead of us, which let us do some interesting things actually. As far as story team people working on it intensively, for much of the set's life cycle, it was just me.
Wow.
And as far as art people, for much of the set's life cycle, it was just art director Cynthia Shepard. So Cynthia and I really just got to kind of put our heads together, take this world that Richard Witters and Adam Lee had created basically on napkins over a weekend. And I don't say that to disparage it. They did incredible work, but they're like, this place needs a creative treatment. Let's do it, and dove in and made this fantastic, Italian Renaissance backstabbing Medici's and Borgia's sort of inspired thing. And we were able to then take that and play with it. Design came to us and said, we have this monarch mechanic. We're calling it the crown. We have this mechanic where you are trying to sort of take this special position and hold it. And I've seen people saying like, oh, it's so awesome how the design captured that element of the story. Actually, in this particular case, the story was able to capture that element of the design, and that was so inspiring. That was fun to do. So we were able to ask like, okay, take the crown. What, like, isn't Brago the king eternal? Well, what would have to happen? He can't die. He'd have to like double die and become a a nega ghost or whatever. How would that happen? Who could kill him? That got us to the character of Kaya, who was my first chance to build a planeswalker from scratch, and that was just a tremendous process. So rewarding. Working with my consultant Monique Jones, with Cynthia Shepard, with the artist Chris Rallis, who just did an incredible job on that picture. Wow, so cool. The attitude and everything, I love it. So that got us to Kaya. It got us to Queen Marchesa, as we asked, well, who would take Brago out and why? And that kind of develops Marchesa from this self-serving assassin to somebody with a real agenda. And then, we got to think about what are some story archetypes from those backstabby type stories, from your Game of Thronesy type stories and that kind of thing that we don't have in this world yet. We thought about, we don't have a righteous crusader who's trying to clean up this town and make it actually work according to its laws. That brought us to Captain Adriana of the City Guard. We don't have a kind of slimy, everybody's friend who nobody likes, let's make a deal kind of guy, and that got us to Leovold. But then it was the design team that wanted him to be blue, black, green. We're like, blue, black, green, what does that mean? Maybe he's an elf, and that led us to come up with the City of Trest, which was first seen on Edric Spymaster of Trest. Right. We pulled that in. What is a sneaky elf like? Well, we kind of already had one, and it sort of feels a little cogpunk, whatever. And so we were able to develop the City of Trest of these sneaky elves who climb trees, la 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 la, I'm an elf, and then reach in a window and grab a document and skitter away. Like that was I love Trest. I want to explore it more. Like, it is fun. The design was able to give those characters cards, that are super satisfying. I realize Leovold is a real jerk in Commander, but he is supposed to be a real jerk. And so just getting to work all that out, kind of much more in real time, much more organically, much more on the fly. And then work with Cynthia and work with the artists to create pieces of art that intentionally aimed a little bit more whimsical than our usual kind of tone that we aim for. Domesticated hydro, where the lady's got the broom, like, he's back again, get the broom, get out of here, you varmint, so right? Like, I love it. And that was a detail from the artist. That was not in the art description. But just the image of the lady with her hydra with the one muzzled head and all the other heads going everywhere. Like, we might do that in a normal set, we might not. But because it's a casual experience, because it's a multiplayer, have fun with your friends experience, I was able to aim it a little bit more in that direction. And having that degree of control, having that degree of just kind of like sit down with a couple people in the room and say, what is this? What does it get to be? What can we do to marry the art, the creative, the mechanics, the names? What can we do here? Mel Lee and her team did a phenomenal job with the names and flavor text. It's one of my favorite sets that we've done for that in a long time. I just think that the way it all came together was tremendous, and getting to work so closely and so kind of seat of the pantsly with all those talented people was just a blast.
That's awesome. Yeah, I really enjoyed that set and playing it, and also getting to contribute to the flavor text and things. So it's really fun.
Oh yeah, that's right. You did.
Yeah, woo. Rock on. It's my favorite set.
You did a great job.
That's public right now.
You did a great job.
And finally, we had one more question for you today, and then we'll let you get back to the other things that you do. So the last question is, how long does the creative team work on each Planeswalker story? Does public opinion ever shift the Planeswalker story?
So that's an interesting question. It depends on what you mean by each Planeswalker's story, I suppose. Because as far as how long we work on any given Magic story installment, on any given episode, that's a question of we sort of pre-outline it in a writer's room that we have. I think we call it episode planning now. Months out, then it kind of sits and percolates. Then a writer is assigned and has some number of weeks to write an outline, submit a first draft to the group, get a bunch of comments back, and then something like a month to write the final draft that we then all again kind of have our chance to have a go at. So if you're talking about individual episodes of Magic Story, that's where we go. When we're introducing a Planeswalker, we work on it a lot farther in advance so that it can be baked in with the set, and then the Magic Story episodes are baked in with the set as well. As far as public opinion changing the course of the Planeswalker story, sort of. We have with each of our characters, and particularly with each of our central characters, we have things that we're trying to do. We have things that we've set out to do to communicate about the characters, and particularly the 5 Origins Planeswalkers. In the run-up to Origins and through the kind of 2-block arc that brought them together as the Gatewatch, we talked a lot as a group about who they are and how they relate to each other and how they react to things. And Gideon's not a lunkhead. He's actually really smart. And when you're just playing him off against Jace, there's a temptation to make him a lunkhead. But no, we talk it out. It's like, no, he's not a beef slab, whatever Liliana might think. He's actually a very smart guy. He's people smart, and so you play his people smarts off against Jace's kind of analytical smarts, and that's the real meat of it. Sometimes we find that what we think is important and cool about a character is not coming through as well as we would like, whether that's because of the execution in the individual Magic story, or often it's us misestimating how people already feel about that character going in, or what they think is important and interesting about that character. And so over time, we do, we change our emphasis with a character and sort of how we write that character and how we approach that character to try to move the public perception more in line with what we're trying to communicate, because it clearly there has been a failure somewhere. There's been a misalignment somewhere at any rate, and we want to correct that misalignment. So that's the way in which public opinion does certainly shape how we write any given Planeswalker.
Sure, that's very cool. Well, Kelly, thanks again for taking the time, and thank you guys for watching and for donating. You're supporting a great cause here, and we'll be hitting it back to the Extra Life folks, but this has been a great conversation with Kelly Diggs. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you.
See you guys.